there, ladies. Good afternoon. It is Sarah Shipton here from Scrapbooking with Sarah, and I'm coming live to you today on August 26th for this week's Technique Tuesday, and I'm super excited to share with you because this is only the second time I have featured this sweet collection in a weekly scrapbooking challenge and also a Technique Tuesday. So I hope that you are excited to see some different products this week as well. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining me live today. It's a beautiful sunny winter's day here in Adelaide, South Australia, and I'm looking at these gorgeous photos that I have here with my family, and it's reminding me of another gorgeous winter's day that we had back in July of 2020. We took a camping trip to Renmark, which is in the Riverland in South Australia. Now, I said 2020, you might be thinking, I remember what was happening in that year. Yes, it was COVID time, and in COVID time, like there were in other countries around the world, we had restrictions on where we could go, and we were limited to our beautiful state of South Australia. I was actually meant to be in the United States visiting our daughter, who was meant to be working as a camp counsellor at Camp Matapanai in Maine in the United States, and unfortunately she obviously couldn't go to the US. My husband and my son and I, we had a trip booked to go and visit her in the July for a period of time. And I had leave booked from my employed job at the time. And I still had to take that leave, but I couldn't go anywhere outside of the state that I lived in. So we took a camping trip to Renmark in the Riverland, and I have to tell you, I was kind of like dragging my feet a little bit because I was like, oh my gosh, as many of you know, we love to travel and to go camping I had 2 weeks holidays, but we actually only went away for a week in the end. And I have to tell you, it was actually one of the best family holidays that we ever had. And I'm looking at these photos now, and you can see our smiling faces. It was a beautiful sunny winter's day. And we just had such a wonderful time. Our daughter was her first year out of high school, and our son was doing year 10, which was his first year of senior school here in South Australia. And so it all worked out great. Look, it all worked out great. So these photos just make me so happy. We took a day trip to Woolshed Brewery, which is actually not far out of Renmark in the Riverland, and it's right on the banks of the Murray River, and they make their own beer, obviously, and their ciders. And our daughter had her driver's license, which was great because my husband and I were able to do some taste testing of the beers and the ciders. And you can see there's a photo here of the menu. I love to take photos of those types of things when I'm out and about. Some beautiful artwork on the walls here. There weren't many people there, obviously, because only people from within South Australia could be within South Australia. And they had some picnic tables on the banks of the Murray, and we were able to take our own barbecue meat. We cooked up lunch. Our son Giant did the barbecue that day, and we got to tour some of their houseboats that they had there. So it all worked out great. We had the Uno cards. We were playing Uno here, and they had... they didn't have a restaurant or a cafe or anything on site, but they had a produce fridge where you could buy like local cheeses and meats and crackers. So we had a beautiful little charcuterie board, and then we cooked a barbecue lunch later. So it all was fantastic. So I look at these photos, they make me happy. I've got my son there with the stamping, and I can't wait to share the techniques with you today for this layout. So these photos were definitely giving me boho vibes. And the reason I wanted to share boho vibes with you this week is because I had a whole heap of leftover 6x6 inch. So let me bring the papers in here and show you. I did feature these papers in our Technique Tuesday 2 weeks ago. So these are the 6x6 inch papers. You can see the designer series paper is double-sided. You get 48 sheets in the pack. So you end up with 8 sheets. Oh, is it 8 sheets of the one pattern? And there's 4 on one side and then 4 on the other side. So you do actually, you could turn these into 12 by 12 scrapbook layouts for sure. Like if I was actually to stick this designer series paper over the top of just a plain white willow sheet of cardstock, you can actually turn them into 4 by 4 inch, 12 by 12 inch bases for sure, because you've got enough of the squares to be able to do that, okay? However, I actually use this sweet collection with my customers. I had my annual scrapbooking retreat weekend 3 weeks ago, I want to say, and I made a layout for the girls and they recreated that. And I actually cut the papers down. I did some 4 by 4 inch pieces of the paper, so I obviously ended up with these 2-inch strips left over. Okay, I've cut this one down, so 2 by 6 inch strips. And so I have made some cards. So my girls that came to my retreat all received a handmade thank you card from me. And in fact, I've posted those cards on my Instagram, so be sure to go and check that reel out. Scrapbooking with Sarah Shipton. So I was able to use a lot of the leftover 2-inch strips on some cards, and I will make some more, obviously. But I wanted to also share with you how I use those 2-inch strips on this week's scrapbooking challenge. So let's have a look at the pattern, first of all, that we are creating. I'm working with, we've got a new pattern now, guys. We've moved from title topper to bottom border. And so we are doing pattern 2A, which is on page 26, bottom border 4 in a row. And we are going scrapbooking back to basics. I'm using an old how-to pattern book, which is called the Reflection Scrapbook Program. I pulled this one out of my archives, off my shelf. And we are turning this single page layout into a double page layout. Now, when I say single page layout, obviously you've got your master pattern here. But then you have alternate patterns as well. So this could be like your master pattern, which you could replicate twice, which in most cases I do if my photo orientation works out well. Otherwise, you can take your master pattern and make that like the left-hand side of your layout, and then you can use an alternate pattern to make it your right-hand side of your page layout, or either or, okay? So bottom border 4 in a row. You are going to need 2 sheets of either cardstock or designer series paper for your base page. I've gone with Cajun Craze, 2-tone Cajun Craze, and you can see that I've actually cut a square out on the back of my paper. Now, the reason I've done that is that you'll also need another 2 sheets of matching cardstock or designer series paper, and you're going to cut them down to 11 by 11, and this is how we've ended up with this border around the outside here. So we're putting cardstock on top of cardstock. So quite often what I do, especially if it is colored cardstock or designer series paper, I quite often will cut out a square from the base page of my layout to save my paper, okay? Now, sometimes I'm lazy and I don't do it. It also is great to lessen the weight of your layout, which is then going into a memory protector, which is then going into your scrapbook album, okay? So I do it for 2 reasons: to save my paper and also to lower the weight of my layout when I'm putting cardstock on top of cardstock on top of cardstock, or paper on top of paper on top of paper, okay? Because the cardstock is a little thicker than the designer series paper. Okay, so the 2-tone cardstock is not as thick as the original 12 by 12 Stampin' Up! Cardstock, which you actually can't buy in 12 by 12 anymore. If you've got some assortment packs left over, that cardstock is thicker because it is dyed all of the way through. Whereas the 2-tone cardstock starts out white, and they dye it the original colour on one side, which is Cajun Craze in this case, and then they dye it a lighter version of Cajun Craze on the other. And that's how we end up with our 2-tone cardstock, okay? So when I tear this paper, and in fact last week I did the paper tearing technique in my video for Technique Tuesday last week, when you tear your cardstock, because the core of the cardstock is white, you can see your cardstock, you can see the white core inside the middle of that cardstock. So the two-tone cardstock is not as heavy as the original Stampin' Up! Cardstock. If you buy the cardstock in A4, and I've actually got some A4 cardstock here. Now, the only reason I buy A4 cardstock is to make card bases. So the A4 cardstock, which you can still get, the A4 cardstock is dyed all the way through. So this is much thicker than the two-tone cardstock, which you're going to use predominantly for your scrapbooking. And the A4 I use mostly for my card making, to make my own card bases. So I can get 2 card bases out of 1 sheet of A4 cardstock, okay? Which is how I made all the girls' thank you cards the other week. So we've got our 2 sheets of 12 by 12 cardstock for the base page. We've got another 2 sheets of cardstock, which I've cut 11 by 11. And then the next piece that you'll need, a paper dimension, is 6 by 8. And this is where I've used my 2-inch strips that I had left over from my 6 by 6 inch paper. And I've actually made my 6 by 8 inch base here. I've made that out of 4 pieces of 2 by 6 inch paper. I had to think about that for a second. So I don't want to have 2 busy patterns next to each other. So let's split that up a little bit there. Okay. So that's what I've actually gone with. And because I had obviously enough paper to work with, I've been able to match my pattern. So I started from the outside and I've worked my way in. So we've got matching paper with all of these 4 pieces. And I've just made sure that I've got the 2 busy patterns broken up in between 2 patterns which are less busy. So we've got Cloud Cover and Secret Sea. And then this is a combination of the Boho Vibes colours. And then we've got Mossy Meadow, and again, another combination of the Boho Vibes colours. Okay, so I'm just going to grab actually my annual catalogue and show you the Boho Vibes Sweet Collection. Starts on page 61 of your annual catalogue. And these are all the coordinating colours up the top here. So we've got Petal Pink, Cajun Craze, Daffodil Delight, Mossy Meadow, Cloud Cover. Do you see my cloud cover nail polish today, girls? And also Secret Sea. So we've got the hero page here, which shows some beautiful artwork samples of using the Boho Vibes Sweet Collection. The Sweet in its entirety retails for $1112.25. And then you can purchase the components of the Sweet Collection individually. Now, I went with the whole Sweet Collection because I knew that this was going to be a collection that I was going to use quite a lot. And it obviously carries for the entirety of the annual catalogue, which is fantastic. So in my Sweet Collection, I have ended up with a pack of the 6 by 6 inch designer series papers. I have got both the Sunshine Vibes stamp set and also the coordinating dies. So I just want to point out that these come packaged separately. The dies come on their own and the stamp comes on their own. I have actually invested in some 5 by 7 inch magnet sheets. If you want to send me a DM, I can order those for you, or a link to where you can order these online. So I've invested in some 5 by 7 inch magnet sheets to sit in the inside of my stamp case. And I've removed the dies from the white card backing, which has the adhesive stuck on them. And I've put them into this magnet sheet, which fits perfectly inside my case. And then I've got my stamp on top of that. Okay. So I've got the stamp and the dies there together. And then also a packet of these muted palette dots. Okay. So you then have some examples of how you can make the unique rainbows that suit your style with these techniques. You can make cute little peek through rainbow patterns, which I recreated the cards from the catalogue slightly to make the little peek through rainbow pattern, and then cutting out all of the die pieces individually to kind of build my own rainbow pattern as well. So I'm going to share that with you. And that is super fun. So that is in your annual catalogue. Where was I up to? I was up to the 6 by 8 inch. Okay. So this is how I've been able to get my 6x8 inch. So if you've got some 6x6 inch papers, you might decide to cut your pieces up too, or you can just use another designer series paper or some cardstock that you need to cut into 6x8 inch. So my tip for you there is to cut, if you're using a 12x12 sheet, make sure you cut it at 8 inches first, and then you can cut it at 6, and then you'll get your 2 pieces out of that. And then the last paper dimension that you're going to cut is your bottom border that runs along the bottom of your scrapbook layout here. So you're going to cut this piece here at 3.5 inches by 12. And again, you're going to want to have 2 strips of coordinating cardstock there, or designer series paper. Now, I have also cut my photo mat here. So I have gone with the master pattern, and instead of having, well, actually, no, I haven't. I've gone with the alternate pattern really, because I didn't have a 5x7 inch photo, but this is a really great tip for you. So I've got my 6x8 inch piece here, but then I wanted to mat my photo on top of that, and I didn't want to put my photo straight onto this designer series paper because the paper is very busy. So I opted to create a photo mat first. So I've gone with the measurements of a 5x7 inch photo in the middle here, which is a little bit different to the master pattern. You can see that they've just used one photo here and made some title embellishments there. So I've envisioned that this was going to be a 5x7 inch photo. So I've also cut my cardstock as a mat. You'll need, if you're going to do it that way, 2 pieces of cardstock or designer series paper cut at 5.25 by 7.25. And I've opted for petal pink just to make it lighter because the photos were quite dark. It's very shadowy here. And in fact, this photo I almost didn't use because you can see the shadow over mine and Darren's faces. It was even worse down the bottom. But once I actually cut the photo down, it took away some of that darkness. So I've opted for petal pink cardstock for my photo mat, and also my bottom border that's running down the bottom here. So I didn't have a 5x7 inch photo. Sometimes if I've planned ahead and I've got time, I will do orders for 5x7 inch prints, especially if it's like a special photo. So I do have some 5x7 inch prints here on hand. So from time to time, I will print 5x7. But it is rare that I do that. And so a really great tip here for you is you'll need portrait size photos to do it this way. I've got 2 portrait size photos here, and I've cut them down at 5 by 3.5 inches. So they're 5 inches high, but 3.5 inches wide. 3.5 and 3.5 is 7 inches wide. So that's where I have taken 2 portrait photos and cut them down, and I've made a 5x7 inch photo out of them. Now, you could leave a very small little gap between your 2 photos if you want, just to break them up a little bit. I've butted mine right up against each other, and I still think that looks okay. And down the bottom here, you're going to have, for your bottom border, you're going to have a strip of some photos. These are all cut at 3 by 3 inches. So the really great thing about this particular design is I've got 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 photos on one double page layout. Now, I have actually already scrapbooked some photos from this day at the brewery already with a different paper suite that we used last year. I think off the top of my head, it was Lake Life. I did have these photos left over, and it was so fun creating another layout from this day at the brewery, but using a different paper suite. And in fact, I think this one is my favorite out of the 2. So this is a really great way if you've got like a little collage of photos where you can cut them down to 3 by 3, and you can create this bottom border effect down the bottom. You could also bring this down, and instead of having your bottom border at the bottom, you could have it running at the top. But we've just done several weeks of title topper. So now we're going to have several weeks of bottom border. Okay, so that's my little tip for you in using some 6 by 6 inch sheets of paper to create larger paper dimensions on your 12 by 12 inch layout. So let's talk now about some of the other products I've used. Hi Chris, hi Pauline, thank you so much for joining me live today. It's lovely to see you ladies here. So to do the embellishing, now I didn't have, there are no stickers with this Boho Vibes Sweet Collection. So I've just got the stamp and the dies. So because I've used White Willow here, I've been able to stamp my sun on here. And this was really fun to do. So I wanted to make sure, now the stamp set for the sun comes in some different components. So you've got like a quarter sun, or that could be a moon if you wanted it to be, a half sun, and then you've got the little sun rays. So I actually stamped the half sun first, and then I was able to stamp the rays by stamping once here and then meeting that up to measure. Again, I did overlap slightly in the middle because it was a little bit wider, but I didn't want the rays stamped on my Boho Vibes Designer Series paper. So I have overlapped it slightly in the middle here, which is why that middle ray looks a little bit darker. You probably don't notice, but I know that that's what I did. So I made a fun little sun stamped embellishment here, 2 against the paper and then 1 on the outside. And then I've done 2 on this side and 1 on the middle here, just to kind of even it out a little bit. And then I have, I've actually stamped that in Daffodil Delight, just to bring a little bit of brightness to the layout there. And then I've used my mini alphabet dies to create my layout title. So I've gone with Woolshed Brewery, and using the mini alphabet dies is great for titles, especially if the title is going to be like there's lots of letters in the title. And I want to give you a little tip for using your mini alphabet dies when you are, because you're probably thinking, how are you sticking all those tiny little letters onto your layout? Now, there's 2 things you can do. You could just run your mini alphabet dies through some cardstock, and then you will want to use the pen tip, the fine pen tip, for this multi-purpose glue pen. So I have not used one of these before, and I was introduced to it through the virtual album retreat that I did with some of the team at home office. And I was so surprised to see so many of the staff using this multi-purpose liquid glue for their scrapbooking. And yes, it makes sense to do it for the really thin, tiny little pieces and thin strips and these pieces here. But to save you time, I used the adhesive sheets. So I have actually done a Technique Tuesday on the adhesive sheets before. You can head to my YouTube channel, Scrapbooking with Sarah, and then using the search function on my channel, if you were to type in adhesive sheets, you would find that video really easily. But basically what I did was I cut my cardstock at 3.5 inches wide, because that enabled me to fit the whole die. This is one big die, and it's going to cut out all of those individual letters, which I love. It's such a great time-saving die. Aside from the fact that it's small for your titles with lots of letters, I cut my cardstock at 3.5 inches first, and then using my adhesive sheets, I took out a sheet of the adhesive sheets, and then I have stuck my cardstock over the top of the adhesive sheets. And then you want to peel, or you peel the backing off and then stick it on top of the adhesive sheet, right? And then you're running both the cardstock and the adhesive sheet through your Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. So you end up with all of these letters already have the adhesive on the back of them. So when I peel that off, I wanted to show you this in the video today. When I peel this backing off, this is now actually sticky. So when I punched all these individual letters out, all I had to do was peel the adhesive sheet backing off, and then I was able to stick my letters on very quickly and very easily. So if you don't have a packet of these adhesive sheets, you are going to want to get some of these for your die cutting life, because it is going to make things so much easier. And I want to tell you that I had a little bit of an epic fail, and I cut my letters out after I had done all of these other little individual pieces. So I'm just going to bring these into the camera shot. This is the dies. I cut some extra just to show you. Here's some I prepared earlier. So this is my stamp set and the dies that I was sharing with you before. While I'm running dies through my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine using coordinating cardstock colors, if I'm going to cut one, I may as well cut multiple, right? If I'm going to sit there and make the time to do that, and I've got this 6 by 8 inch space to put my base through my machine, I'm going to make best use of my time, right, and my scraps of cardstock, and I'm going to cut out all these extra pieces anyway. And I love to do that because when it comes to create my little embellishment clusters, I've got some different sizes and colors to choose from in variation. So this is where I should have used these scraps of my adhesive sheets, girls. So I could have put these dies on top of cardstock with adhesive sheet backing. Look at all these scrap pieces of adhesive sheets I've got in my pack. I should have actually done that, but I didn't. And I've got all of these tiny little, you know, rainbow pieces to stick down, and these little ivy pieces, I guess, the greenery, and I used the fine tip of my multi-purpose glue pen, which was really easy to use. You only need to apply a very little bit of pressure. It will come out white when you're going to stick down. So I actually use this pen to stick down all these small little pieces, and you're only going to apply a tiny little bit of pressure to put the glue on. So it comes out white, but it does actually dry clear, okay? Now you can use this glue pen on your paper. I mean, it says you can use it on photos, but I personally would not use this on my photos, okay? I use my Stamp and Seal on my photos. And it will dry clear. So there were some of them where I put a little bit too much on, and you can see I've got these little tiny love hearts in here. And we've got like this sort of open chain look running through this little rainbow piece here. So I had to be very diligent in getting just tiny little bits of the adhesive on the back of my rainbow pieces. This is where it would have been good to use my adhesive sheets, because that would have been so much less painful. But I wanted to try out my new glue pen, and I actually really loved it. So it is permanent, or it's removable depending on how you use the bond. If you want to make the bond removable, you only need to moderately apply glue, allow it to completely dry, and then position on your page. Or for a permanent bond, apply the glue and attach your pieces while the glue is still wet. And now those pieces are permanent, okay? So the reason I did my little embellishment cluster here is because I actually had a gap between these two photos. So I don't know whether I didn't cut my photos straight or whether I was lining them up on the page. Maybe I didn't cut my paper straight. I don't know. But I started with this photo and I moved left to right. And these two photos did not butt up against each other straight. So I had a very small gap between these two photos. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can grab one of these cute little rainbow pieces and I can stick it over the top here of my gap. So I was making a little rainbow arch over Kayla and I. And then I was like, oh, well, I've got these little green ivy pieces. Let's kind of stick the ivy on here. And I put those on. I was like, oh, I really like that. And then I just kept going. Once I started, I couldn't stop rainbowing. So I put on the Daffodil Delight and then the Mossy Meadow. And then I've got my little Cajun Craze. And then I've got my cloud cover. So I've kind of made like this little cluster. Once I started, I couldn't stop. It looked so cute. And then I've just put some of my little muted palette dots on there. And then because I'd made the little embellishment cluster on that side, I was like, I've got to make another embellishment cluster on the other side. And I decided to put it over a little rainbow over Jai, cooking us the barbecue. We did such a great job. And then again, I've basically just copied what I did on the other side, but I've got different rainbows in different colors. I did look at adding some pieces of my leftover pieces of rainbows at the top or in the corners here, and it was just going to be too much. So I love to play around with that design element when I'm putting my embellishments, whether they're die cuts or stickers on my layout. I kind of just piece them and see if I like it or don't like it, but I kind of really didn't need anything else up the top or on the sides here. So sometimes less is more. You can still embellish your layout beautifully using die cuts and stamping and no stickers. And then for my journaling, because I had done the stamping and the titling here, I opted to do my journaling running from left to right, just along the bottom of my layout here on this white bit of cardstock. Such a peaceful spot on the banks of the Murray River. Darren and I did beer and cider tasting with their paddles. We BYO barbecue food, and Jai cooked our lunch. We even took a tour of the houseboat. So some fun journaling there, and I do need to put my date on. So just to give you a heads up with your journaling, this basic black Stampin' Write marker is going to be discontinued. So this is a thicker marker. It's got a 0.5 mil at one end, and then it's got like this kind of paintbrush calligraphy tip at the other end. You can buy this Stampin' Write marker on its own in basic black. It will come out as a thicker. It is a water-based dye ink, which means that if it gets wet, it is going to run, okay? So this has been discontinued. If you do like that thicker marker look with the calligraphy pen, my suggestion would be to jump on my online store and get your marker sooner rather than later. So in fact, all of the Stampin' Write markers, while I'm on that, are being discontinued. And so they are already in the last chance product section of my online store. And at this stage, they have not been reduced in price, okay? And instead of having that basic black Stampin' Write marker for your journaling, you've got the 3-pack of the journaling pens. So these come in a 3-pack. There is 0.4 mil tip. It's a much finer tip for journaling. I will say that it is smear proof, but it is not waterproof. So if your scrapbooking layout gets wet, your journaling is going to run. So please be very careful, or just be aware of that, I guess. Because they come in a 3-pack, I kept pulling my journaling pen out of the pack to use. And I was like, well, hang on, which one have I used and not used? I want to give you a little tip for this. I've just put a little adhesive dot on the bottom of the pen that I'm using, so I can use that pen until it's like literally dried out or the nib has worn down. I am a little heavy-handed with my journaling, so because it's a 0.4 pen, I do think I'm going to go through this journaling pen a lot quicker than I would do the Stampin' Write marker. But a little tip for you, if you want to like kind of run one down before you move on to the other 2 pens, then just put a little adhesive dot on the bottom of your pen so you know which one that you're using, and you can keep the other 2 aside for when you are ready to use those journal pens. So that's just an added little tip there for you. The other tip that I wanted to give you, aside from using the 6x6 inch designer series paper on a 12x12 inch layout, is these little rainbow pieces. You might have noticed have got these small little love hearts and like these little inserts. They are going to actually punch out when you run them through your Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. And you might be thinking, oh my gosh, do I have to sit there and get every single little hole out of that? Well, no, because firstly, when you run your die cut through, especially if your mats are new, though, those little holes are going to punch out really, really nicely. But yes, you may have some pieces that are left over inside the die, or actually inside the piece that you've just cut. So you're going to want to invest in one of these. This is called a Take Your Pick tool, and I have got the die brush insert on the top of that already, okay? So it doesn't come with that die brush on there. It comes with a different attachment on there, and then you do get this little pokey bit. So this actually comes out. You've got a spatula end at one end. I use mostly for the sharp stabby bit. Do you love my technical terms, girls? On the other end. So this is the Take Your Pick die brush. So you can buy this brush top bit separately, and then you get 2 of these foam mats. So what you're going to do is, if you've got a die piece or a piece of the cardstock, which has got the little pieces in, you put that over the top of your foam, and then using the die brush, you're going to run that over a few times, and it's going to punch out all of these tiny little pieces onto your mat or onto your die, okay? So that is just another little tip for you for this week's Technique Tuesday. I hope that you have found all of my tips that I've shared with you for this layout helpful. I will post this video in our Facebook group and also upload it to my YouTube, and I will drop links to all of the products that I've shared with you in this week's layout. I can't wait to see what all of you lovely ladies come up with. Thank you for watching live or on replay. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and I will see you for next week's Technique Tuesday on Tuesday, September 2nd. Bye for now.